Hello, everyone, and welcome to Petworking. I'm Peter Kenseth, Vice President and Partner at Maya Strategy Group, and I'm here today for a dive into an organization that is involved in just about every facet of the pet care and animal health ecosystem, and one that we had a chance to visit with at WVC. We have today the Chief Medical Officer of Antech Diagnostics and Mars Science and Diagnostics Division, Dr. Jimmy Barr. Honored and thrilled to have Dr. Barr on the program with us today, and it kind of represents a jumping off point, but a jumping off point right up the chain from the conversation I had with Dr. Philip Bossi at WVC about how Antech is taking a measured and gradual approach to introducing AI into its workflows, into its instrumentation and its processes. Obviously, there's a lot of talk about AI in the vet industry, and much like any new technology, there's some very rapid adopters, and then there are a lot of people who are a little bit scared. Whether it's worrying about AI taking their jobs, whether it's worrying about the accuracy of the AI and it potentially hallucinating, and whether we're just having ChatGPT or Claude diagnose our pets. Dr. Bossi and I got into a lot around how Antech is taking this measured approach, making sure that these models and agents are very well trained so that they cannot hallucinate and that they're only programmed for very specific use cases. But he also alluded to the ability that Antech has now that it's been acquired by Mars Antech has been owned by Mars for a while, and Mars acquired Heska a few years back, so now it's a fully robust diagnostic suite. But what a lot of people don't know is, beyond that, Mars is the largest holder of veterinary clinics in the United States. They are one of the largest pet nutrition manufacturers in the world. They have Wisdom Panel. Up until recently, they had the Whistle Pet Activity Tracker that they just divested. They have innovation labs like Kinship and the Waltham Pet Science Center, and all of those entities work together. And Dr. Barr today is not only going to tell us how that's feeding into Antech's AI ambitions, but also feeds into really everything they're doing and how Antech also contributes back into the broader Mars ecosystem. So without further ado, I'll welcome Dr. Barr to the program. Dr. Barr, thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome to Petworking.
You bet, Peter. Great to be here, and thanks for inviting me. This is one of my favorite topics to talk about is how innovation meets the needs of the profession and how we're playing a small part in that.
Yeah, well, I mean, for those of you who don't know, because I think a lot of people, if you're not deeply embedded within the pet care ecosystem on a day-to-day basis, you think of Mars and you think of the candy conglomerate. You think of M&Ms, you think of chocolates. You may not think of all their pet food brands. You certainly don't necessarily think of them in terms of veterinary holdings or animal health diagnostics companies, but they're there. Mars Petcare's broader manifest is a better world for pets. And, I think it's, you can see the enthusiasm that you lit up there and talking about the innovation and driving better lives for our pets on a day-to-day basis. But and you go way back prior to being Chief Medical Officer for Antech and the Science and Diagnostics Division. You were the Chief Medical Officer for Blue Pearl, which is a specialty and emergency chain of veterinary hospitals that Mars acquired years back. Mars also owns Banfield and VCA. So there is a whole wealth of data from the vet clinics, from the research and the work that you guys are doing at Antech, from the Waltham Pet Science Center, from Kinship. How does it all fit together? And how and companies that are doing such amazing things in the space?
Yeah, I mean, I feel very fortunate to be a part of Mars, and I'll tell you why. But I mean, you started off with the our whole mantra is a better world for pets. Like that's where we start, right? So, when we think about, how we make decisions or how we make choices, we always view that through our lenses. What we're about to do, going to create a better world for pets, and so from that perspective, that fits in with my personal ideology. I mean, I really appreciate being able to work for a principle-based organization, and because of that, we get into a lot of different areas that would help to improve veterinary medicine in general. I mean, not just you know our particular slice is in the diagnostics and kind of in the science and innovation part, but we work very closely with our friends over at Mars Veterinary Health, right? So a lot of people don't know this, but Mars has been in the pet care world for a long time, right? So when you think about all the candy and snacking and things like that that are associated with Mars at the present moment, but um, you know it was in the 30s whenever Mars sort of bought their first pet food business. I mean, Chappie was a pet food company that was in the UK back in, I think, 1935. It was when that was sort of bought and kind of became part of the Mars world. And so we've been a part of, you know, pet care for a long time, and that's because of the Mars family. The Mars families, they're they're pretty dedicated to pets, and they really feel like that there's a spot in which they can really help to improve the world around pet care.
Yeah, yeah, and I want to get into some specific examples of collaborations. I know we're gonna
Yeah, of course.
to get into that, but as you mentioned, they are Mars is legacy pet food. And a lot of people don't realize when you're in your local pet food store or in the grocery aisle, Pedigree is Mars. Greenies is Mars. Royal Canin is Mars. Mars recently acquired Champion Pet Foods. Eukanuba, lots of Imes, Caesar,
Yeah.
Temptations. Like there are so many different pet nutrition brands that fall under that Mars umbrella, and I think for a lot of people, because it is such a diverse house of brands, they don't necessarily equate it back to Mars.
Right.
But Mars does sit at the head of that. And we've talked about all the different holdings. Now, you mentioned connecting with and working with Mars Veterinary. Do you guys also work with the pet nutrition side of things to share data, or what does the ecosystem look like
Yeah. So that's a really good question. I mean, the Mars Pet Care, actually, until the most recent acquisition in the snacking space, Mars Pet Care was the largest division of Mars, like as far as people goes, right? So there's a sort of it's a really big part of Mars Incorporated. I mean, just in general, there are four divisions to Mars Pet Care. So that's pet nutrition, which you rattled off a lot of the brands that are a part of the pet nutrition
I
part.
was just a
Uh,
global pet 2 weeks ago, so it's fresh in my
yeah,
mind.
yeah, exactly. That's perfect. I mean, and Royal Canin, is another. They sort of operate as their own division. RC is a really fabulous ecosystem partner for us, just from a number of different ways. And then there's Mars Veterinary Health, which I think that's the sort of the clinical arm. That has VCA, Banfield, Blue Pearl in North America, and then Linnaeus and Anacura in Europe. And then there's some smaller bits in Asia, but there's a part in Asia, and then the Mars Science and Diagnostics division, which has Antech in it, and as a part of Antech, this includes sound technologies. This includes what used to Antech radiology. In addition to the reference lab, I think that most people are familiar, and that's kind of big, the biggest part of Antech for the longest period of time. But also with the HESC acquisition and the in-house diagnostics component, those are all contained under Antech. But we also include the Waltham Pet Care Science Institute, which you kind of talked about, and Waltham is an amazing organization when it comes to the discoveries that they make. They're actually a group of scientists that are there just doing greenfield discovery. I mean, they're doing actually hardcore, basic sciences almost to some degree, but it's all in relation to pets and to pet care, and they really embody the better world for pets. And that group is a big cost, and but what they add in terms of the scientific discoveries is pretty amazing. Additionally, the wisdom panel is a part of the science and diagnostics division, and so the genetics component of that, is is really good, and it kind of fits into that aspiration of a better world for pets.
And I know up until recently, you guys had Whistle as well, and
Yep.
just sold it to
Yep.
Tractive. Did the activity data feed into that while you guys still have it? Do you guys still have
Yeah.
access to that data?
Yeah, I mean, to some degree, yes, in the sense that, we have the data that was kind of part of the initial, um, the Pet Insight project was what it was called. You'll find that on the, if you look at the Mars website under Mars Petcare, they talk about the
Right.
Pet Insight project. And what that did essentially is matched up clinical data through Banfield hospitals with genetic data with wisdom, and then there was the activity component of the Whistle product, and they map together not just the genotype but the phenotype, so the actual like expression of kind of what was happening in those patients over time, and it's yielded some exciting information.
Awesome. So
Yeah.
getting back to Waltham,
Yeah.
and so they're there doing greenfield research, and they come up with something. Do they then reach out to the appropriate corresponding division? So if they make like a nutrition related discovery, they might reach out to one of the nutrition brands and be like, "Hey, we got something for you guys here." And then you kind of like, are they sort of a hub, and everybody kind of?
There we go. I think you're back.
All right, we'll edit that out later. Sorry about
Yeah.
that.
That's all right.
So what I was
Yeah.
asking is on a diagnostics component, do they then reach out to you if they come up with
Yeah.
and do they sit as the hub, or how does that, when you're driving innovation forward, is Waltham sort of the catalyst for the discoveries that move everything forward, and then they reach out to the appropriate division, or am I thinking of it
Well,
both
no,
ways?
it goes both ways, honestly, Peter. I mean, there's it comes from the business unit. Sometimes the business units say, "Hey, we have this idea. Can you look into it for us for Waltham?" So they have this happens with, nutrition. It kind of can happen within Mars Veterinary Health. It can happen within, the diagnostics. But oftentimes, Waltham, they have they have a cutting edge scientists that work there. And so they will think of an idea, and they have big litany of ideas, and sometimes they'll come to us and say, "Hey, we have the opportunity to kind of learn about this, and this. You know, how would this sort of fit into the current ecosystem of diagnostics, for instance?" We'll use diagnostics as an example because that's what I'm dealing with now. But you know, will this fit into, a clinical workup? Like, will this actually add value? And sometimes it's really, really interesting scientifically, but it's not necessarily the thing that's going to be practical to be able to be used. And so we help them contextualize some of those things to say, they've got the ideas, and it's almost like a funnel as it goes down. When we think about, what would be helpful for a pet, for a pet professional, veterinarian, or a technician, or whoever is helping to make decisions, helping clients make decisions based on a diagnostic. And so when we think about that, we will oftentimes apply, practicality mindsets to this. Like, will it matter? And so the ideal scenario is that you've got a really novel thing that happens in Waltham that is characterized, published, all these sorts of things. It then gets transferred to the Science of Diagnostics Research and Development Group, which then takes that scientific discovery and makes the diagnostic that can then fit either into a reference lab assay, or it will fit into an in-house diagnostic, machine or analyzer. And then that would then become commercialized and be able to be used. And so the idea is that you have these things that would sort of flow through. That doesn't always happen. Sometimes it's not technically feasible to do, all of these things. Like the innovation process is incredibly iterative as you go along. Like you have to sort of test it and, have a hypothesis and continually test that hypothesis. And that's not always, doesn't always sort of become a successful diagnostic when you get to the other end. But that's the idea. And and Waltham's doing some amazing things. I don't know if one of their more recent publications was a different way to kind of look at microbiome data, like in the canine GI tract. And
Interesting.
they discovered 89 new species of bacteria. Okay. So I think that's amazing. I mean, like that is true discovery where you're actually discovering new things. But then the question then is like, how does that help to improve the health of pets, of dogs? And that has yet to be seen. But that's the kind of discovery work that they're doing. They're doing
But
this
it could lead
amazing
to something
things.
down the road, right? I mean, like
100%.
if
Oh yeah.
when we if we can figure
Yeah.
out whether the presence of those bacteria are beneficial, and what the you know strains that you want to elevate more of, and the health outcomes those lead to, but you have to start by first knowing that they're there. And
To
uh,
characterize them.
yeah,
Exactly. Yeah,
exactly.
exactly. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that is super cool. That's super
Yeah.
cool.
Very cool. Very cool. They do great stuff.
And so would and they're not explicitly just working on diagnostics or pet nutrition or veterinary. They're working across the full suite of the ecosystem. It's just
They sure do. Yeah.
science that is related to pet health, and they're out there doing this greenfield research and exploring. To what extent are they, and I know we, kind of getting it back to the conversation that I had with Dr. Bossi, to what extent are they looking at AI? I
Mm.
feel like everybody, you have to be looking at AI right now. And,
Yeah.
and Dr. Bossi very eloquently put it, you guys are taking this measured approach and, setting out defined use cases like in radiology, and, making that available, but also, understanding that there needs to be human oversight. And, this is a tool to amplify and make the workflow more efficient, not to replace the veterinarian. But I look at it, you guys have this trove of data, with all the vet health records. Dr. Bossi mentioned, there were like 16,000 radiographs that went into the AI radiography. But I mean, you have, clinical records that, span, there's got to be mountains of data in there. And I look at like,
Yeah.
something like a clinical decision support, or, even just being able to feed a lot of this data into a proprietary large language model. There could be huge advances. Where does who works on that? Where does that,
Yeah.
whose purview?
That's a great question. Yeah, that's a great question. So there is a team at Waltham that works in AI, and I want to I'm gonna I'm gonna divide this into kind of two parts. So there's products that ultimately, like Rapid Reads a product, right? So there is collaboration when it comes to um, uh, that group, along with kind of the internal science and diagnostics team that are kind of helping to improve the commercial offerings of artificial intelligence within that. And so that is definitely true. The second part of that, which I think is almost a little more interesting when you talk about the um, what Waltham's remit is, like with the science of discovery, they are harnessing AI to be able to accelerate scientific discovery. So when you think about, there are a number of different um, diagnostic methodologies that really haven't been possible until artificial intelligence was became around to allow the ingestion of so much data to kind of make sense of what's going on. I mean, I it and I'm sure we'll see as time goes along that there will be more advanced platforms that we can kind of see that, like, artificial intelligence enables its presence. Like it wouldn't be possible for you to ingest enough data, um, in order to be able to do it. And one of the things you mentioned earlier about the number of radiographs that were included in Rapid Read, um, that's actually 16 million, not thousand. So it's an enormous amount of information that goes in there, and the computing power that is required, and the artificial intelligence, models that can ingest all of this data. Um, these things wouldn't be possible without that, I guess, is the point. And so that team at Waltham is amazing in the sense that they have, they've really, uh, they're not just doing the the product side. They're doing thought leadership as well. There's a great article that comes up, which we can link in the show notes, that the AI team, led by Dr. Demeyer, put out. I think that was last year, that kind of talked about, what should the elements be that we kind of consider as we're going through with artificial intelligence, and what's needed, and all of that sort of thing. And that intellectual technological machinery, harnessed with the access to all those other data points, is an incredible engine for innovation. And so, like you talked about earlier, like, how do you decide, where do the ideas come from? Well, the ideas come from, you know, that machinery, but it also comes from the business unit. So it's like got these practical aspects of it, and then the things that you're discovering kind of all feed into what's the next big thing.
Yeah, I mean, and throughout my career in consulting and pet, I've always looked at Mars and said, with the ecosystem that Mars has, like you could essentially become the Google of pet care if you wanted to. I mean, with the history of pet health data, at the veterinarian, you have back when you had Whistle and Wisdom, like in my mind, I envision this future where triggers, are alerting pet parents, like, based on your pet's, genetics, and based on what we're observing with this activity tracker, and cross-referencing this against,
Mhm.
health data and outcomes that we have seen in, all these other pets, we think there might be a serious, a risk for this based on
Yeah,
the scratching behavior that they're demonstrating, or they're more
right.
lethargic, or as our
Their
wearables are
respiratory rate is higher or
right.
whatever, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Um, exactly, and so we're getting more proactive and getting pets into the vet before problems develop. You and or potentially catching these outlier cases, because you have this huge amount of clinical data that's been ingested, and
Yeah.
it's flagging that one-off random case that maybe the vet isn't thinking of, but you pop in the symptoms and it's like, oh, check for this.
Did you think
Um,
about that? Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I agree. It's funny that you say that, because you know, Peter, I'm a critical care specialist. I'm an emergency and critical care, and did residency at Angel in Boston, and, like, I've worked clinically in the sickest of the sick patients. But whenever when I think about, like, what does, where can we make the most impact? It's the prevention of disease that actually is the thing that I think is the biggest spot for us to be able to, improve the lives of pets, just like long term. And when you think about, if the central goal is to have, you know, a greater lifespan, health span for pets, the prevention of disease or early,
Protection of it.
yeah, early detection, but then also interventions. There's some things that like we know that if you start some of these things early, that it will actually, kidney disease is a perfect example. If you can start, if you've got some early warning signs of kidney disease, you can potentially start a kidney diet, and that those patients will do better over a period of time. And I'm sure we'll become more advanced when it comes to therapeutics and diagnostics as we sort of to do that. But I think that the biggest link that would be amazing is that, like, from a genetic standpoint, going along, and then being able to detect before phenotype of disease occurs. I mean, if you think about, how what we even define as disease now, like we can use kidney failure as an example. You know, that's the elevation of blood values that happen, because of accumulation, because of the disease. So it's a lag, it by definition is a lagging indicator of disease. How do we shift that farther forward, so that we can detect those ahead of time? Maybe it's artificial intelligence being able to kind of, look at patterns of lab work over time, so because I think, and this sort of gets into kind of one of our, commercial pushes, which is in the sort of the wellness aspect of things, right? So focusing in on the wellness, because if you can have serial lab work over time, you can then sort of detect subtle differences that would probably be present before those lagging indicators of disease, right? Does that make
Sure.
sense? And that's just one example of switching focus a little bit, of like, instead of diagnosing when there's a problem, let's intervene and diagnose before there's a problem.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. We years ago, back before Antech acquired Heska, and Mars acquired Heska, we had Dr. Miller on the show, and we did a whole episode around preventive diagnostics, and
Yeah.
the fact that 40% of pets don't even make it to the vet annually, and it's really
Yeah.
hard, to be able to treat and prevent some of these situations that end up being pretty catastrophic for pets, but if they were caught earlier, could be, minimal expense to the pet parent, minimal pain and discomfort to the pet, and a longer lifespan, health outcome. It's a big part of, we launched the Petworking Angel Fund last year, and a big part of, the fund is designed to help prevent economic euthanasia. But, we also try to use the platform as a message to say, you should have pet insurance. You should be bringing your pet to the vet regularly. You should be getting these kinds of tests done because, if you invest, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Um, I think it's great, when you look at the Banfield side of things, and their reliance and marketing of the subscription model. I think it does get pet parents in the door more often. And I don't know if you guys have data showing that there are better long-term health outcomes for people who are bought into that subscription basis. But I think so much of what we can do in the pet parent side of things is, getting people away from this cost avoidance model of like, oh my God, I don't want to go to the vet because I don't want to have to spend money, to
Right.
showing that, hey, if you have insurance, if you have a wellness plan, a subscription plan, and you're investing in this up front, it's going to save you a lot of money in the long run, and it's going to buy you more for your pet, which is what everybody wants.
Yeah. I mean, you got to give Banfield credit, like, for it. I mean, they've been at this wellness journey for years, for a long time. And it's not just in this sort of their business model with that, but it's also in how they've harnessed data and how they've worked together with the rest of Mars Veterinary Health to bring about one of the most interesting things that we probably don't talk about enough, but one of the more interesting things is the Mars Petcare Biobank. The
Yeah.
Mars Petcare Biobank is an amazing investment by Mars Pet Care, where it takes theoretically younger pets, right, that are in Banfield is been the one that's contributed the most, but it's taking younger pets and then enrolling them and testing them year after year for at least 10 years. At least that's the sort of the thing, 10,000 pets, and where dogs and cats, where we're looking to sort of, characterize them genetically, monitor them, clinically over time, measure different aspects of of their their journey, including like a questionnaire, and we're sort of monitoring that over time. And we're going to be able to have a set of data such that, the, you know, as naturally occurs within a population, diseases are going to come about, and we'll be able to kind of identify at some of those points in where we which in which um, maybe we can decipher something from their samples, where we could detect disease earlier. That is a pretty amazing thing, and Banfield is sort of the leading edge of that. So it's mostly their patients, but that's it's these are Mars Veterinary Health patients. Antech does the logistics of that, including the storage of the samples. So we have like -80 freezers where we have plasma, serum, urine, feces, hair, all some samples from these patients where we're kept, and then we're analyzing them currently. The Waltham is actually analyzing a lot of the stuff that's happening currently over time. We're also saving things for methodologies of measurement that we don't even know about, right? So things that may happen in the future that is pretty amazing, and that's not something that's going to create you know a return on investment. I mean, that at least certainly in the short term, this is a long-term play for the profession, and which is it's a pretty amazing thing to be a part of. Because I think about as a veterinarian and a someone that's interested in science and kind of the progression of what healthcare looks like for our pets. This is an exciting thing. I'm not going to be the one that benefits from this. It's going to be subsequent generations of veterinarians that can help advise pet owners of what the best choices are. And that's a pretty amazing thing to be part of. I mean, I'm pretty proud of the biobank.
Yeah. Hey, and Biobank was launched in 2022, right?
That's right.
And you
Yeah.
have 4,500 or so pets
Yeah,
enrolled.
it's more and more every day, right? So it's the idea, the aspiration is to get 10,000, I believe. And I'm sure that that's going to change over time as we continue to sort of enroll pets. There's going to be maybe we want to carry it out for 20 years. I don't know. I mean,
Now,
we'll see.
is every pet tracked for 10 years or until end of life from when they enroll? So if you're enrolling pets today, those pets will be tracked till 2036, but the ones who were enrolled in 2022, they'll only be tracked till 2032. But it's not a
Yeah.
study that's going to be completed within 10 years. It's going to be completed 10 years from when you enroll your 10,000th patient.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think the latter is true. I think it's going to like follow each patient out, but the idea is to serially get pets, like when they're young, and then follow them until they, kind of reach, later on in life. I mean, we don't. So right now, there's not a lot of geriatric diseases that have been found, right? So it's things
Are
like
you only enrolling young
dermatologists.
patients so that you have the
There is a limit. And I don't know the details specifically, what the enrollment criteria are, Peter, but there is a like a window of when they're enrolled.
and
Yeah.
now is there a standard set of like diagnostics or things that are baseline that is there a standard panel that you roll out from Antech that every participant in the study is doing on a regular basis?
Yeah. So, and and this is one where I'm not, this is not my area of expertise, but directionally, these patients would get normal lab work every year. So CBC, KMUA, heartworm test, fecal, so vector-borne disease type of things. Um, and then depending on, so and there's also questionnaires that are sort of delivered every year. So, and those questionnaires can vary in the questions that are asked, but largely around, um, um, you know, like quality of
Food,
life,
behavior,
things like that,
activity
food.
level.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. I mean, and so it's kind of decipher the quality of life of that pet. But but and kind of early on in the sort of the journey when they're sort of enrolled, they also get a wisdom panel as well. So they are genetically sequenced, right? They're characterized genetically. So that can almost be like a baseline of how things are evaluated as things go forward, so um, there's all kinds of things that are in the genetic code that we've yet to unlock.
And with this, you mentioned, the kind of connectivity, in your focus on wellness and prevention. From like a commercial perspective, does this help you to develop new tests, new things that you want to roll out, and is that something that you can, like, you're getting feedback from clinicians who are on the front lines with the veterinary, with Banfield, with Blue Pearl, DCA, things like that, and great if we had something that could detect this, or if we could, get a more rapid response time on that.
Yeah, I mean, theoretically, yes. I mean, that would be at least one of the goals. How about that? And it wouldn't just be for us. I mean, like the idea is that investigators would be able to, you know, crunch the numbers and look at the data from these pets, in general. So not just an internal to Mars thing. It could be out, external folks that would also, if they wanted to, interact with that data, they can. We've got a governance process around that to figure that out, but that is a possibility. Um, but we always listen to our customers to try to decide what's the next best thing, and sometimes it's the innovation process. I mean, it's a mix of things, right? There's practicalities of um, use cases that are not served now that would then result in, a new test, or, oftentimes it's a tweaking of the test, it's a making it more germane for the bacteria that we would find, for instance, and um, you know, the different species of anaplasmosis, for instance. Like that's a kind of a recent one in which we sort of did. But like there's things like that. There's also you know, how do we get better at blocking and tackling? How do we get logistics better? How do we transport cases around, samples around faster so that we can get these reference lab things done very quickly, or have the turnaround time be faster, or how do you make your in-house chemistry equipment have higher throughput so that you can get through your cases in the morning so you can get your dentals done at noon, and so everybody can kind of go home at 5, right? That kind of stuff, right? There's practicalities, but then there's this pile of discoveries of things that we don't even know that we need yet, Peter, right? Like things like that are out there that are on the edges of science that you know that we could potentially harness to create new things. And I mean, there's a lot of work that goes on with that, of you know things that are being discovered in other parts that we are able to apply to our own self. I mean, one of my favorite quotes is with Henry Ford, when he said, if you'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse, right? So you have to balance. You got to balance the kind of what fits into kind of current practice thinking with what the future is, and then you got to meld those things together, and that then create innovation that would advance the profession. And so that's always the balance.
Yeah, yeah, and and I'm sure from your perspective too. It's also, you want to make sure that whatever you're putting out there, you have that confidence in the sensitivity and the specificity, and that you're
Yeah.
going to be able to, you know, the guidance that you're giving to, the results that you're delivering to vets and ultimately to pet parents are ones that they can trust. I know we've got lab week coming up for you guys here in a couple weeks. You know, what are the considerations, as you roll new diagnostics out to market, and as you bring in, more developments like AI, and I imagine it's got to, for me personally as a pet parent, the most agonizing thing is if I'm waiting on a sample and it's going to inform the treatment plan or let me know what's going on with my dog. I want that as quickly as I
Yeah.
possibly can. So I'm sure that's one consideration, but you also have to balance that. As quick as you can get a result, if you're not giving an accurate result that you can stand behind and make a well-informed treatment plan, that doesn't really do a lot for you either. So talk to us a little bit,
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, because Lab Week's coming up. I think by the time this airs, hopefully will be during that week. So it's the week of April 19th through the 26th. And Lab Week is a time where we take a chance to kind of take a beat to appreciate all the folks that work within our labs. And specifically, if you think about a reference lab, the laboratory, there's tons of amazing technology. There's a lot of really expensive equipment. There's PCRs. There is the chemistry machines. There is the serology that's sort of happening. All of these things that are happening with incredible precision, but they're only enabled by the people that do it. And the laboratory technicians are from a veterinarian's perspective, an unappreciated link in the chain of care as we're sort of delivering it. So, from my perspective, I think they, the equipment's great, the technology is great, but the people are what make that actually hum, and it makes it, and they make it so that, the the precision in which the instruments are working under are fitting within an incredibly narrow window. So the ones that are doing the quality control on it, making sure that everything is exactly like it should be. um, the logistics, if it would make your mind spin at the logistics of getting a sample from you know Duluth, Minnesota, to a lab in Fountain Valley, California, right? So when you think about some of these things, the logistics alone are a dizzying array of things, but we do it with such precision and such tracking that it's, rarely, are there any issues when it comes to that? And it's because of the diligence of our teams that do that. And so, I think about all the innovation that we can do and we can do, and I think about the equipment that we have, but it's the people that really work in our labs that really make that hum.
Yeah, I mean, if you can't ensure the integrity of the sample from collection to getting it to the lab, that's one piece. Then you have to have people handling that appropriately, and still maintaining the integrity and running the necessary tests and putting it through the correct equipment. I think from a pet parent perspective, we sit and it's like, okay, we just watched, the blood draw, or, we brought in the fecal, or, the urine sample, or the x-ray, or whatever got taken. But you don't necessarily think about on the back end, all, you're concerned with the expediency and the accuracy of the result. But like you said, there is, yeah,
Yeah.
if you're shipping a sample across the country, you gotta, you gotta make sure that is temperature controlled, that nothing gets spilled, it doesn't break, it's labeled appropriately, it doesn't get lost. There's a lot that could go wrong, and it's very impressive. When you think about the speed with which you can get results today, and then factoring in all the things that have to happen with that sample, it's certainly
Yep.
worth taking a week
Yeah,
to appreciate.
I completely agree. And I think as a practicing veterinarian, you don't appreciate those things. And the the sample goes into a tube and into a bag. It gets picked up by someone, and then magic happens, and then numbers come back in your email, right? Like that's kind of how we kind of feel like it works. But the 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 diligence and the things that are done in those labs to make that precision happen doesn't happen by chance. It's not magic. It is through the like large efforts of a lot of people, really well-intentioned people that are as crazy about pets as me and you, right? I mean, they chose to work in a veterinary um, lab, instead of a human lab. And so these are people, these are pet people too, and they take their job very seriously about making sure that pet parents have the information that they need to make good choices.
Yeah. No, I mean, and they should, right? I mean, when we think about the value that pets bring to us, family they are. Why would you want anything less than the same quality healthcare that you'd want for your own kids? To me, it's one of the biggest disconnects in the system is that we have over 90% of people that would refer to their pets as family, and yet we have 96% of pet owners that don't have pet insurance. And it creates a lot of imbalance with, yeah, I mean, they are the kids that, almost without question, you're going to outlive and have to say goodbye to, but, you treasure every minute of every day that you have with them. And, um, I came back from Global Pet last week, and I made a post on LinkedIn last week because my first grader, wanted to learn multiplication, and we were there practicing with my dog Peony's treats, and it turned into she's there using those as her manipulatives, and we were talking about how multiplication is groups, and she was so psyched when she'd get it right, and then she'd go and give Peony a treat. And Peony's 11 and a half. I've had Peony since she was between 2 and 3, 9 years. My daughter's 7, so she precedes my daughter, but it's been
Yeah.
amazing to watch the two of them grow up together and how close they are now. And I hope she makes it to 20, but I know none of us are going to be ready for the day that we don't have her anymore. And that's I think that's what it all comes back to, is whether you're choosing to work in a lab, or you're devoted your career to veterinary medicine, and are at the forefront of developing new and exciting diagnostics and other innovations at Mars to make the world a better place for pets, or you're volunteering at a shelter, or just running a podcast. It all comes down to, we recognize the value that these animals bring to our lives, and it's worth taking a moment to celebrate everybody that makes it possible for us to enjoy more and better years with our pets.
I couldn't have said that better. That's amazing. That's what we do it for, right? I mean, we do it for those times of 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 your daughter, you know, well, melding her life and her learning in with giving treats to her pet, right? And so, from that perspective, I mean, it's very much a part of your life. And veterinary medicine is a uh, human centric, pet, it's molding together pets' lives with our lives, and how that makes that better. You can talk about all the innovations that you want. You can talk about um, how difficult society is, how difficult it is to be a veterinarian and a veterinary technician in this day and age. But, you know, at the very end of it, we are incredibly fortunate to be able to be in this industry and be able to kind of do exactly what you're talking about. I think that, we live in a very exciting time when it comes to veterinary medicine. We're going to be able to do stuff that we've never been able to do before. And it's up to us to kind of link that to longer times in which the pets can be a part of our family. And I think that that's what we're all here to do. And I couldn't have said that better.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if I can say it any better than that. So, I know we're coming up on our time here, but this has been a fantastic conversation, Dr. Barr. I really appreciate you taking the time to join us. I appreciate all the work you and all the people in the Mars ecosystem are doing, making the world a better place for pets. And it was fun to get a chance to look behind the curtain a little bit today and understand how all the different pieces work together to achieve that outcome of a better world for pets and more and better years that we can have pets as part of our family.
Amazing. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, thanks for being on. On behalf of Dr. Barr, everybody, this is Peter Kenseth with Petworking. Thanks for taking the time to listen, and we will see you all again soon. Take care.